Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first annual Pride in Politics. It's so great to have everyone here. My name's John Boyd. I have the honor of chairing New Britain Pride, and we have an excellent panel lined up for you this evening. Erick Russell, the Vice-Chair of the Connecticut Democrats, Themis Klarides, the leader of the House Republicans, and Monte Frank, who ran in 2018 with Oz Griebel for lieutenant governor as an independent candidate. So welcome everyone, and let's kick this right off. First to you, Leader Klarides. The governor about 25 minutes ago put out a letter to the legislature's leadership calling you guys into special session to deal with the November elections, as well as police accountability and transparency. What are your thoughts on the governor's letter and those two issues?
Well, the House Republicans 2 weeks ago signed, each one of us signed a petition to go into special session and sent the governor a letter asking for us to go in. And we mentioned a couple items that were fiscal in nature at the time. That was obviously before the last week and a half occurred. And certainly as far as police issues, police transparency, police actions, et cetera, that have gone on in the past 10 days after the tragic death of George Floyd. I think that it's certainly something we should be taking up, but I mean, this is something that has to transcend politics. This has to transcend party. This has to be, in my opinion, a bipartisan, nonpartisan, common sense approach to what is wrong in Connecticut that we can fix to make people safer. Plain and simple.
Plain and simple. Just a few matters of housekeeping. Obviously tonight we were supposed to be originally at Five Churches Brewery here in New Britain. Five Churches is an LGBTQ owned business. So as a small token of appreciation, they also gave us some beer to enjoy as we do this. So it's just nice. I just want to give a nice little shout out to them. Also, we are going to be putting up a link to register to vote. Obviously, it's very important for us to all get engaged, no matter what our political affiliation and party affiliation is. So if you just go to the Secretary of the State's website, you can sign up to register to vote. With that, let's get into the panel. We got some questions that we've come up with and some questions that have been submitted to the public. And if anyone has any questions they want to ask to our panelists at any time, just simply raise your hand and then unmute yourself, and then we will go from there. So let's get started. Erick, do you want to take a moment and sort of introduce yourself and sort of what you do?
Sure. And first I want to thank John for putting this together. This is a great event. You and New Britain Pride, I think this is an awesome way to celebrate Pride Month, is to really talk about a lot of these things impacting the community. And also it's great to be on the panel with my friends Themis and Monte. So I for the last year and a half or so, I've been serving as vice chair of the state Democratic Party. And it's been a great honor to serve in this role. It's obviously a really important time, and it's a great time to be involved and engaged. In addition to that, I'm an attorney at Pullman and Conley, so I split time between Hartford and Bridgeport, working mostly kind of in the finance area. And I've been fortunate to be involved in a lot of these issues in a lot of different ways. Both professionally, I served as the chair of the LGBT section of the Connecticut Bar Association, and have been involved in the diversity and inclusion committee of the Connecticut Bar Association as well. And I've worked on a lot of these efforts, both in the community and with my firm. So thank you for having me.
That's great. Next to you, Themis. Introduce yourself, talk about your legislature record and support for the LGBTQ+ community. The floor is yours, Madam.
Oh, I'm hearing a little noise. Okay, it's gone. Well, again, I will also thank John for not only everything he did to put this together, but all of his advocacy on many issues, including LGBTQ issues, but education issues, and his passion for everything he does. So thank you again, John, for doing this. And of course, my respect to Eric and Monte for all their advocacy, all their hard work in regards to these issues and other issues that are important to the state of Connecticut. Because I think when you look at this panel, you look at a cross-section of what Connecticut is. Regardless of party, regardless of race, regardless of gender, you know, we fight for what we believe in. And I've been very fortunate in my career to have been able to support, vote for, advocate for, and really push for equal rights for people across the board. But I've had a passion for LGBTQ rights. I have two of my closest friends have been together for about 30 years. They've been married for a handful of years. And I just, you know, that's all I've known in my life is just people being people and people loving each other and caring for each other, regardless of what they look like, who they love, where they live. And I'm just very proud to have been part of, you know, part of a legislature that passed in 2005, the first civil union law without judicial interference. And, you know, the funny part of that story is that was in 2005, and you fast forward to 2012, I was chosen for the platform committee for the National Republican Convention. And I'd never been on the platform committee before, so I didn't actually know how it worked, and I missed the morning because I got in a little late. So apparently that's when they had the working groups. And so I got there at noontime for the afternoon session, and each state has two. I don't know if the Democrats do it the same as Republicans, I would assume so. Each state has two members from each state on the platform committee, and they start voting on things, and it's very similar to the legislature, but I wanted to sit there and listen and observe before I raised my hand and jumped into something I wasn't familiar with. And all of a sudden, about an hour or two into it, somebody from across the room stood up and said, I make a motion to make you know, civil unions part of the Republican platform. So I said, I seconded it. And literally the entire room fell silent. And what I didn't know is what I missed that morning was a woman from Rhode Island who was one of the Rhode Island platform committee members, who was very passionate about LGBTQ issues. And that wasn't something that was going to be put on the platform, but she made such a big deal about it that they agreed to let her call it as long as nobody would second it. But I wasn't there for the morning. So I seconded it, and the entire room fell silent. And then I went through my 5-minute diatribe about how we did it in Connecticut in 2005 as the first state. And the state hasn't fallen apart since. I mean, it may be falling apart in other ways, but it wasn't falling apart because of that. So, you know, it's interesting that it's just been an issue I've been very passionate about, because I just believe people should be treated the same regardless.
Thank you, Themis, and thanks for being here. Monte, introduce yourself.
Thanks, John. Truly a pleasure to be on this panel with people that I can not only call friends, but people that I have worked with, confided in, and built systems that have improved people's lives. You know, John and I have worked together. Eric and I go way back on some of our bar efforts. I co-chaired the CBA's Diversity and Inclusion Committee, former president of the Connecticut Bar. Eric and I are currently partners at Pullman and Comley. I co-chair our litigation department. And Themis and I used to work together at both of our prior law firms. But moreover, you know, I would see Themis more in political realms than I would in the law firm realm. And, you know, while politics in a large measure in the state have become somewhat toxic and dysfunctional, there are still very high quality individuals in politics with a ton of integrity. And Themis and Eric are at the top of the list, able to work across the aisle on issues that matter for the people of Connecticut. Unfortunately, I think they become a little bit of a dying breed. And with some efforts, I think we can bring it back and involve more people in the state of Connecticut. What is interesting is, you know, people think of politics as Democrats and Republicans. I'm a former Democrat, but as an independent, I represent a larger constituency than either the Democrats or the Republicans. The independent, the unaffiliated voter, which is different than the independent party of Connecticut, unaffiliated voter represents 41% of the electorate in Connecticut, and that number is only growing. Republicans are, I think, somewhere in the 20s, and the Democrats are in the low 30s. But the power structure isn't the same. The parties clearly dominate politics, and I think with some effort, with groups like SAM, which I'm working with, the Serve America movement, we can start breaking up the duopoly and bring some transparency and accountability across the board back to our political structure, and try to bring back a political realm that works for the people in a cooperative way and is not as dysfunctional, particularly in Washington, and somewhat in Hartford. The issues that are before us are very important to me. I graduated from Cornell Law School in 1993, and I'll just tell the story just to kind of frame the issue. At that point in time, there was one of my classmates by the name of Shannon Mentner. She left law school with a dream to improve the rights of the gay and lesbian community across the nation. If you had told me in 1993 that we would be where we are today in terms of gay rights, I would have told you you're absolutely crazy. That will never happen in America. America is not ready for gay marriage, is not ready for all these different things. I lost track of Shannon until I was sitting on the Connecticut Bar Association's Board of Governors, and I was asked whether or not the bar ought to join in filing an amicus brief in the Windsor case. And I read the brief on behalf of the legal entity that filed an amicus brief at the Supreme Court, or I'm sorry, in the Second Circuit. And when I got to the bottom of the line, the signature on that brief was Shannon Mentner, my classmate. So I immediately called him, and we had a discussion. And he brought me up to speed what had happened in the 25-year period since graduating from law school, and all the things that he had done to move the issue forward. And when that case was decided, and we all know what the result was, it really was a tipping point for what was to become, what was to come. And yet here we are, and there's so much more to do to bring equality, not just to the LGBTQ plus community, but so much more. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Shannon always stands in my mind as a person who had a dream and a vision and the courage to act on it. And if we all have that dream, vision, and courage to act on so many issues, we can really change this country in a very positive way.
Thank you so much, Monte. Moving on to our first topic, and we'll just go down the panel here. Erick, Themis, Monte. Do you support lifting the FDA's discriminatory men who have sex with men ban, which currently there's a 3-month time deferral that allows healthy Americans to donate plasma? And specifically to Themis as a state representative, what action can we take on a statewide level? Erick.
Yes, I 100% agree with lifting the ban. I think this was one of the examples, right, of this kind of discriminatory practice that I think flies under the radar for a lot of people and doesn't realize the impact that it has on our community and how it makes people feel, right? So we've made all of this progress. We talk about a lot of these things as if it's all done, and you still have these things that are built into, you have policies that are still built in that ultimately discriminate against people. And I actually found the recent shift to kind of shortening the time to 3 months even more offensive, right? It's like, if we can't look back at these policies now and realize that they're discriminatory and there's no real reason for them, right? I mean, it's furthering stereotypes about the community that have existed for a really long time. And it's a dignity issue. This is about treating people with dignity and respect and as human beings. It's actually shocking to me that there's still so much objection to this, but I'll leave it there.
Before I move on to you, Themis, I just want to recognize that Representative Farnan from Fairfield is here. Thanks, Representative, for checking in. And
thanks, John.
If you don't mind, Themis, I'll yield a few seconds to Representative Farnan. Representative.
Sure. So thank you so much for having me. What you guys do is great. And, I just want to say that anything that I could do to help with dialogue, with any kind of issues with civil liberties. I'm a proud sponsor, even though session was a very short period this year. I am a proud sponsor of what was called Raise Bill 5178, and it was better known as the Connecticut Parentage Act, which was to provide access in a clearer path to those through assisted reproduction to establish legal parentage regardless of sexual orientation. And I just want to say I want to be an ally, and I want to be someone that you guys could turn to with questions or concerns, and be someone in Hartford who you could turn to.
Hey, thanks so much, Representative. And once we go through the panel, maybe we'll get your thoughts on a few of these other issues. So thanks for being here. Leader Klarides,
Sure.
MSM, and what can we do on a statewide level?
I mean, listen, what we can always do on a statewide level is put in legislation, because that's how we change things like that. The problem is that FDA, it's federal. And so we can't make them do one thing or the other, but we can take a position in our state as to what our, where we think we should be with it. And I think Eric is right. I mean, it is almost more offensive that it was moved from 12 months to 3 months, because the only reason they did it was because of COVID, right? And so if COVID didn't occur, nothing would have even changed in regards to the time frame. It's just discriminatory. I mean, if you're healthy enough to give blood, you should be healthy enough to give blood. In the end, no matter what your sexual orientation is or anything else. I mean, listen, if you're a heterosexual man or woman and you are promiscuous, they're not going to tell you can't give blood, right? They're not asking you. Though, I mean, I haven't given blood for many years, but I think they ask you how many partners you've had. I mean, I'm not sure what they ask you, but I just think, you go back to the basic premise, and I think, quite frankly, a basic Republican premise that less governmental interference, make sure people are healthy and safe. And so that should really be the only concern when you are asked to give blood. Everybody should get asked the same basic questions, because this is about sexual partners, right? It shouldn't be about the gender of those sexual partners, in my opinion.
Let me also mention that there's this movement in the band that has been sent around letters to all 400 elected leaders here in the state, and I hope that both you and the rest of your colleagues would be able to return those letters, and we can sort of put pressure on the FDA commissioner to reduce it and reduce the time frame. Yeah, Monte, your thoughts on the MSM ban?
John, I don't know if it's just me, but I'm getting a lot of static when you're speaking. I don't know if everybody else
yes,
is.
John,
you're
I'm
the only one
the
that I'm
same
getting
thing,
it from.
So
all right, let me see what I can do here.
What I've learned from the Zoom calls is sometimes not calling into the internet audio and using the phone one is the best way to get out of that trap. Not that I want to see you go, John. I'm not trying to take over the organization.
Yeah, no, let me see what I can do here on my end of things. While I try to figure that out, Monte, do you want to give your response?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I agree 100% with Eric and Themis on this. The science ought to govern who can give blood and who can't, not based on any sort of discriminatory reaction, which I think the policy is entirely based on. The other thing I would just say that it's really refreshing to hear Themis talk about this from the Republican standpoint. I wish more people in her party were as open-minded and progressive as she is on social issues.
Thank you there, Monte. While I still try to figure this out, is there anyone else who has a question for our panel while I try to figure out my sound? I see Salerno from New Britain is on with us. I'm not sure if you have any questions for our panel.
No, I probably have some comments, John, over time, but I'll certainly wait till the panel weighs in a little deeper. I also, by the way, to the representative who spoke on behalf of the Republican side, I appreciate that that progressive perspective and that open concept, which actually often doesn't always come from either party when it comes to really speaking on this particular issue. Not in every instance, and not locally or state, or certainly not even nationally. So I think we'd be fooling ourselves to assume that both parties are as open about all those issues, at least my experience. Just for the record, I am a registered Democrat endorsed by the Republican Town Committee in the city of New Britain for 4 terms now. I have been active, certainly in the what is now the LGBTQ community, which tends to be the case these days everywhere I go. That in fact, watch the growth and watch the progress move forward, and I think it's just in a different time frame now, different sorts of activities and different issues. And just for the record, also, I served as an investigator for the Connecticut Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities for 12 years. So certainly a lot of the issues around discrimination have come to the fore. And they've been addressed in many different ways through the CHRO, and saw a tremendous number of increases. The assumption being a CHRO is only about issues of race or color. It's all about protected classes. And too often people are not aware of that, including the LGBTQ community, of being aware that there are ways in order to process issues and complaints and problems, particularly in the workplace. And what the state of Connecticut does, which is public accommodation. Public accommodation is not even recognized by the federal government. And the state of Connecticut has always been in the forefront, if you will, the cutting edge on those issues about protected class discrimination. So, I mean, if that ever gears toward that in this conversation, I'm certainly available to at least respond to some matters.
Thank you, Alderman. I guess moving on to our next topic that we have, which is dealing with the CIAC lawsuit. I'm not sure who would be the most qualified to give a summary of it, of what's going on, but sort of what's your reaction to the CIAC lawsuit, and what do we think are potential outcomes? And I guess let's go in reverse order this time and start off with Monte.
Sure. Well, obviously, this is a very complicated issue, and the courts are going to wrestle with it and make a decision. The case that is currently pending is with Judge Chotney, who is a federal district court who's been around for a long period of time, is a extremely qualified and good federal judge within our district. I particularly like the fact that he called out that you ought to be referring to people as transgender male or transgender female, rather than the attempt by one of the sides to inappropriately, in my view, characterize one of the parties as male, even though that person didn't identify that way. To me, that was a very good sign that the judge not only gets it, but is going to be very sensitive to the way people are treated within his courtroom. Frankly, I think the U.S. Attorney General's view on this is utterly ridiculous, and I'm trying to show some deference and respect for for Mr. Barr, who is the U.S. Attorney, but his view that, without considering much, that the practices of the CIAC is discriminatory, to me flies in the face of what Connecticut law is, and two, what in my view, the appropriate intent of the CIAC in doing what it's doing is all about. So, again, I think, until we really get some guidance from the court, it's hard to see where it's going to go within the constitutional rubric. But at this point in time, I do like the way the issues are framed, because I think it is being set up, at least in the court, to be as fair and respectful of people as possible.
Thank you there, Monte. Themis, the CIAC lawsuit and what potential state response could be.
Well, I mean, first of all, Monty's right. This is very complicated right now. It's going to get more complicated and complex as we go along, because we have those girls, those high school athletes who have filed lawsuits in regards to this. Now, the bottom line is the state of Connecticut, the CIAC, the Connecticut Interscholastic Athletic Conference, has handled transitioning student athletes in the way that Connecticut statute tells them to handle that. Whatever you identify as, whatever gender you identify as, that is the sport that you will play. So if you're a boy and you're transitioning to be a girl, then you get to play girl sports. They are following Connecticut laws. And as Monte mentioned, the United States Education Department Office of Civil Rights held that that the ruling was that's not the proper way to do this. And they're now considering whether they transfer this over to the Department of Justice. They are now considering whether they stop funding. So this is, this kind of just happened recently, and they're making that decision. But I think we have them deciding what they're going to do. Then we have these civil lawsuits pending, and we're going to see what happens with those. But I'll be honest with you, this is one of those where I get a little bit stuck, because I think that how college athletes are handled, and I'm no expert on this, but just for the research that I've done, the way they handle it is if you are undergoing hormone therapy for, I think, at least a year, then they consider it appropriate to play that particular sport in the gender that you are transitioning to. Unfortunately, in high school, with high school athletes, it's a little different, because you have kids that aren't developed yet. And there's a lot of medical evidence that say that, if you're 14 or 15, it's very likely you're not going to start hormone therapy. So I think it's a lot more difficult on the high school level. You look at some of these track athletes, and let's be honest, I'm running to get the best time I can get. Whether I come in first or second or third place, what colleges are going to look at is my time more than my the place that where I place in that track meet. But if we use tennis, let's just use that as an example. You end up having boys playing on a girls' tennis team. Now, I don't know, you get into these complicated situations, and this isn't one of those black and white things for me. As always, I just want to do it in a way that comports with the laws and treats people fairly. But I think it is a little bit complicated, because ideally, I think the hormone therapy way that they handle it in college is the direction I would go in, that I think is the most, science-based and common sense based, but that gets very hairy when it comes to younger kids that aren't developed yet. So.
Hey there.
Yeah, so I guess I don't look at this as being as complicated an issue, and not to get into kind of the legal side of this, because I do understand, the nuances and things around that. But what we were talking about is kids in high school, and if we were talking about this from an equality standpoint and from kids being treated equally and as kids, right? And the idea that behind team sports, the idea is that these kids are building character, and they're learning how to work in teams, and they're learning about relationship building. At the end of the day, if someone identifies as a girl, they are a girl. And I understand that this is not easy for families, and for a child who ends up with a second place trophy instead of the first place trophy in the event that they end up losing. But I think that sometimes we're overcomplicating this, and I think it's hard to ignore the fact, while we're talking about some of the nuances, that this is just another example of attacks by the Trump administration on the LGBT community. The threats in Connecticut around this, it's clear this isn't about a view of analyzing the law. This is that they don't ultimately agree with protecting trans kids. And that's been apparent in every aspect, and in the rollback of laws down the board that impact the LGBT community. So, well, I understand that it's not easy for everyone to maybe wrap their head around, or for people who aren't as familiar with the community, or don't necessarily understand language around this, or whatever the case may be. I think at the end of the day, when you kind of look at what we're really talking about, this shouldn't be as complicated as it actually is.
I think Erick's right. It's only complicated because of the legal framework, but boiled down to its essence. And I think Themis was saying the same thing. When we are talking about kids and how they identify themselves, and that should be the driving force, particularly in light of all the other issues that that trans kids are facing. This would be the least of their worries.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult, right? We see so many kids and so many adults who went through this as children. I mean, I don't know all of your experiences, so I certainly wouldn't speak in regard to that. But I would imagine, from all I know, it's extremely difficult, excruciating to be a teenager, a pre-teenager, younger than that, to have feelings that they don't feel they can express, or they don't feel they can be honest with who they are. And you finally kind of get to that point where you said it and people know about it, and now you're being treated differently. And that's where, that's kind of where I fall on the side of that. It's complicated because, as with anything, and some people are uncomfortable with it, right? And anything people aren't familiar with, they can be uncomfortable with. So I think that when this decision is made and we move in that direction, for me, allowing people to be who they are is supersedes the rest of it, especially kids. And this could be something that affects the rest of their lives.
Yeah, no, I definitely see where all of you are coming from, and thanks for your thoughts on that. The other.
Can I just get one more comment on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course, Monty.
I think this is important. I've been racing my bike my whole life. I've raced on some U.S. teams, and it's interesting. A lot of the people who are questioning whether it's appropriate for someone who's transitioning to race as a girl or vice versa as a boy have remained silent in the face of performance-enhancing drugs, which are prevalent throughout sports, and we seem to do very little about it. And my view on that was, as a competitive athlete who's won a bunch of stuff, is it's not relevant. It's, people are going to do what they're going to do, and I'm not equating performance-enhancing drugs with transitioning. I'm not making it's a different point, but I think the point is that I think there's a little bit of hypocrisy there for people who remain silent about PEDs and the advantage that gives people in sports versus those who are raising transitioning as an issue because they believe it gives the transitioning person an advantage in sports. And I think that hypocrisy needs to be pointed out. People ought to be able to participate in sports as an individual without any sort of questioning as to who they are. I'm part of a team called Team 26, and we've had high school kids join us as we ride from Washington down to from Newtown down to DC to raise awareness around gun violence. And one of my high school riders, who's now in college, has transitioned. And I remember that he called me up and he said, "I just want to tell you that my name is now Quinn, and I'm transitioning, and I hope that doesn't impact my ability to ride as part of Team 26." And my response is, that's exactly why you're on Team 26. We want people to be who they are, have the courage to speak out when they see injustice. And it was just a very short conversation, but I think more of those conversations need to occur because it really promotes acceptance, which is what we really need.
Absolutely. The other issue relating to the trans community, and I know we do have a few trans individuals on the call this evening. According to the FBI, sexual orientation and gender identity bias accounts for more than 21% of all hate crimes. Yesterday at the flag raising, we took a minute of silence to remember the over 5 dozen transgender individuals who were killed in the last 3 years. What do you think are certain policy solutions we can take to help protect the trans community and move this discussion forward? I guess I will start this time with Themis.
Well, I mean, I think that there's a lot more to be done, but I know that I was really happy that last year in 2019, the legislature, we voted on an act concerning gay and transgender panic defense, where people actually used a victim's actual or perceived sexual orientation as a legal defense, which quite frankly is just preposterous to me to even start. I mean, we shouldn't have to have done a bill to stop that, but that was at least one step we took in regard to protecting that. But I'm very aware there's a lot more we can do.
I think with everything else, I think the things that we can do around diversity and particularly inclusion in the workplace training is incredibly important. Looking at gun violence, we know the statistics about guns being used in hate crimes, particularly when it's addressed to trans. That kind of come together around this issue that should be addressed. But the current level of violence against trans is unacceptable. It needs to be brought down.
I mean, I think this is a really good, I think like all of these issues, right? I mean, there's a lot of intersection, and to try to look at it in isolation, I think is part of the issue. And I'm kind of thinking about this and looking at the Black Lives Matter movement and all of the energy around that and conversations about addressing a lot of those just police brutality and ignore all of the other kind of systemic things that have impacted the Black community for so long, right? Because it's the same thing with the trans community. I mean, if you look at the fact that it's largely minority trans women who are the ones being brutalized and murdered. And these things all, a lot of it factors in when you start talking about issues gaining employment, when you talk about discriminatory practices when it comes to housing. All of these things play into each other. And I think I guess the overarching policy piece is that we could have legal protections for the trans community. And there are still many states that do not have sexual orientation and gender identity as part of their anti-discrimination laws. We're fortunate enough to have that here in Connecticut. And I'm fortunate, I believe Themis was a strong supporter of that. One of the things that we have to acknowledge, though, when we talk about these issues, and this again ties in with Black Lives Matter, right, is for too long there are people who are supportive of our causes and our issues, but feel comfortable remaining silent on them when there are people who are not speaking out, and when there aren't people pushing policies that would actually benefit communities, because it's just not enough anymore, right? It's not enough to be an ally and not speak out when people are pushing policies that discriminate against communities. Because the reality is when we're talking about oppressed or who have not been given equal opportunities, there isn't that same power in positions of power to speak up for them and make sure that they're working on their behalf. So, I think that I believe there's a case right now pending in Supreme Court, nation and gender identity in Title VII. But these are things that we have to be looking at. It also it's cultural. We have to talk about these things. We have to make sure that we're challenging people when they are making comments or when they don't understand something. Because at the end of the day, this is, again, it's about humanity for the trans community. The community has been harmed so far.
And thanks, Eric. And once again, I apologize to everyone for the audio issues. I know it's been a little bit of a learning curve for all of us through quarantine and COVID. So just a few more questions here. I guess I got a row of individual questions here for you guys. So and I will say that these are a little more difficult because I'll give you some time to think about them. But Eric, traditionally the LGBTQ plus community has voted with the Democratic Party. With that said, what has the actual Democratic Party in itself done for the community over the years? And this is an audience question that we got yesterday.
Okay, and I think I caught most of your question. It was a little bit about the LGBT community. I mean, I think you can break this up, right? We can speak specifically to what's happened in Connecticut. I mean, in terms of Themis is absolutely right. As a state, I mean, Connecticut has been way ahead on these issues and has really been a leader across the country. And the Democratic Party in Connecticut has spearheaded those causes. Now, I don't say that to take, I am so appreciative of Themis for her position and for being such an ally and being supportive of these causes for a long time. That has not always been the case for many people in her party. And so, I think the party has pushed civil unions and codifying gay marriage after it was passed by the courts, adding sexual orientation and gender identity to our anti-discrimination laws. I mean, the list goes on. And so I think that a lot of that work has happened by Democrats in Connecticut. And I think on a national level, you see similar pushes. I think what is clear, especially right now, is that where I thought we were going to be in a position where, as a country, we were playing offense on protecting the LGBTQ community. For the last 4 years, we've been playing defense, right? So it's been pushing back on these discriminatory policies, banning trans people from being in the military, or the education secretary threatening funding for trans kids in schools. And protections in the workplace. There's been attacks all across the board over the last 4 years. The rates of calls coming into a lot of our organizations, Lambda Legal, GLAD, all of the people who are doing so much work on the national level and our local organizations, threats and discrimination, all of these claims have come through years because people feel like they have a license to do it. And so, just recently, I believe it was Tennessee, the governor signed a bill into law allowing organizations to refuse to let same-sex parents adopt. There's just this pattern, and I was really expecting that we were going to, as a country, be able to move forward on a lot of these issues. But I think, unfortunately, Democrats have been playing on the national level, have had to play defense over the last several years.
Thanks there, Eric. Themis, as I think everyone knows, you are stepping down at the end of the year, not running for re-election, thus you're not going to be leader anymore. There's going to be an open seat for the leader of the House Republicans. How would you encourage Representative Candelora or whoever your successor is to try to move LGBT issues forward for the whole state as a whole? And what's your comments there in terms of the leadership race?
Well, listen, I'm not going away anytime soon, and I'm going to do my best to find new ways to advocate for issues that I feel strongly for, and this is obviously one of them. My caucus is very clear about how I feel in regards to these issues, and I will continue to push that. I think earlier in the hour, I had made the comment about Republicans, and the reality is this: not all Republicans feel that way, and not all Democrats feel that way. We're lucky to live in a state that most people's perspective is more towards the middle and more open-minded, but you're always going to have people that, whether it's religious reasons or how they were raised, or just because they're closed-minded about things on both sides of the aisle, that don't necessarily feel the same way I feel. But I made my comment before because as Republicans, we're typically supposed to believe in less governmental interference and kind of staying out of people's homes and letting them do what they want to do. And I personally believe, my philosophy is focusing on our economy and making sure our public safety and our public health is as good as it can be. And we're protecting people, the elderly, children, et cetera, and treating people equally and staying out of their homes. Letting them live their lives as long as it's, they're abiding by rules and laws, but regardless of what color their skin is, or regardless of what gender they identify with, or their sexuality. And, so that's what I believe. That's what I believe. That's why I'm a Republican. Now, certainly I don't agree with everything my party is for. I believe in what I believe in, and I'm going to fight for that, whether it's technically Republican or it's not. But I'm going to keep fighting for those things one way or the other.
Thank you so much. And Monte, as former president of the bar, what changes in the laws or regulations do we need to make the state more accepting, both from a legislature side as well as maybe from a borough side?
I'm sorry, John, I didn't get that question at all. I didn't hear it. While you're figuring it out, I do want to make just one brief comment that the debate I had against the Republican candidate for lieutenant governor was contentious if Themis was running for lieutenant governor. Let's just say that the candidate did not share Themis's enlightened view. And as I said earlier, boy, I wish more Republicans shared Themis' view on these issues. It would be a much better country if there was a consensus between the two major parties on issues that really matter to people.
Thank you.
I think that pretty much answered the question, Monte.
I don't even know what your question was.
Without even asking.
but that was a softball. That was an easy one. My opponent on the Republican side for lieutenant governor really mirrored a lot of the stuff you're seeing coming out of the Republican Party in Washington, which is, I don't think is representative of where a majority of the Republicans in this country are. And I just wish that more Republicans who believe what Themis does would speak out on these issues and be vocal in expressing a firm opposition to these discriminatory statements and practices that are coming out of Washington. We are who we are as a people based on how we value people, and discrimination. We should be moving forward to become a more enlightened society rather than falling back on our original sin.
Couldn't have said it better than myself, Monte. So now we sort of move into the last two questions I have for each of you in terms of the fun questions. So I guess we'll go with Themis first here. As we said, you're not running for re-election. Outside of politics, what's next for you? Outside of politics in life, because obviously you're very well known around the state, and people are going to be watching what you're doing. So besides politics, what's next?
Did you ask me if besides politics, what's next?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah,
Is that
outside
what
of
you
politics.
asked me? I just want to make sure I got the
Yes.
question. Well,
Yes.
I'm getting married, so that's besides politics, I guess.
Well, hey, congratulations. And I know we all send our best to you and Greg.
Thank you.
Hey, John, Danny Salerno, I don't know if you can hear me, folks. I do have to, quite revealing in terms of people's positions on some things, and I really appreciate this, this effort. I have to go on to a Rudd caucus. That's the Republican unaffiliated Democratic caucus in our state of Britain. So, and I'm the majority leader, by the way, in a council that doesn't have a majority. So I just thought I want to just comment that I hope that this is done again by New Britain Pride, and there's some ways to alter the format possibly to include members of the participants or the listeners. I want to thank the panel for giving me the opportunity to hear you. I actually learned quite a bit and validated some points as well. So I just want to say thank you for the opportunity, John. I really think it should be a regular event. I mean, I think you might actually grow with altering format and improving on participation. But thank you, folks, and I do have to depart. Take care. Nice to meet everyone.
You too.
Take care. Thank you.
To Alderman Salerno's point, if we weren't having troubles with audio and technology, I think we'd all have some thoughts on what was going on and have questions for the panelists. But moving on to Erick, as CT Dem's Vice-Chair, you have to have some idea of what's going on with the convention in Milwaukee. What are your thoughts on that? Are there any updates there? Can you make any news for us?
So you would think that I would. There's a lot in the works still. So we're actually still at the CT convention at this point after the announcement of the move. But outside of that, we're still waiting. I think the DNC is easy. I think from the beginning of the planning stages with this, and obviously when the pandemic hit, there were conversations, virtual convention. I think they've been exploring and planning kind of backup options all along. So we'll see how it plays out.
We'll see what happens there. And I think it's definitely going to be difficult for everyone. Monte, can you talk to us a little bit about this new organization that you're working with, SAM, and sort of an overview of what it is?
Sure. So SAM was formed the day after the 2016 election by General Counsel at Morgan Stanley and a number of lawyers in New York at one of the Wall Street or the prominent New York firms, national firms, international firms. And it was based on not a left-right axis, not based on specific issues, but based on things like accountability, transparency, electoral reforms, and empowering people to have a real voice in government. It's called the Serve America movement. It's a growing national movement that will hopefully become a real third party across the nation. We have a Connecticut task force that is set up by Oz Griebel. He's chairing it. Oz has been out there promoting things like vote by mail. He had an op-ed in the Hartford Courant on Sunday that I would recommend that you all read it. Ranked choice voting, which would provide the electorate with some real choices in their candidates. But moreover, I think it would produce more moderate candidates and better candidates rather than people who typically live on the extremes. It would also force people to play nice in the sandbox in the political world instead of just throwing arrows at each other, because how people rank their votes matters. So you can't just go purely for your base and throw hand grenades at everybody else, because your number 2 and your number 3 vote matter. Those are the key things in New York. In the last gubernatorial election, Sam qualified as a minor party. In the next election, ran over 100 candidates and had some successes. In response, the governor of New York pushed through some campaign finance reforms, which would require that minor parties have a presidential candidate to put people on the ballot in the ensuing elections. That's being challenged in federal court There's a prominent law firm that is doing it on a pro bono basis because it's literally unconstitutional. But those are the challenges. How do you build a real third party that is representative of more people in the United States parties and put through some electoral reforms that essentially would break up the duopoly to allow more people to have more voices and for a position where it's working for them. That's our challenge. That's what we're trying to accomplish. I hope you all check it out and have your support going forward.
And thank you, Monty. And the last thing I have before we move into closing comments from everyone, I kind of have a little feeling that the three of you could, maybe run for a particular office down the road. And I do think this panel would be an excellent debate panel on face the state, possibly. So I got closing statements. Themis.
I don't know what you just said about us. Well, no, John, I want to thank you again for doing this. I mean, I've gotten to know you for many years now. You're always at my office door, or text, I just hopefully you keep doing it, and I'm very hopeful to see what you do in your future. So, and Monty again for all of the work that they've done and will continue to do. And I think you're right. I mean, I think most of us agree with more things than we disagree. People would just focus on thinking about how they want to be treated. I think they would treat other people differently. So I think we're all going to keep fighting for this state a better place to be.
And Themis, for the record, that was the question about governor. Are you running for governor?
I only got one word. I just don't know.
Did you get the word governor?
So I don't know what I'm supposed to say. A woman governor? Is that what you said?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Erick, closing statement.
Thank you for organizing this and for all the work you're doing with New Britain Pride. Thank you to Monty and Themis for being on to kind of chat about a lot of these issues. What I would challenge everyone, and again, I kind of things that are happening right now, but we all really need to be engaged in these things, and we see things that aren't right, and when we see policies that are being passed down that are discriminating against our brothers and sisters in the LGBT community or in other groups, we need to make sure that we're really using our voices, because it's not enough to say that you are an ally if you're not speaking out about a bunch of wrongs that are taking place. And because what happens is this, right? We move over time and nothing happens, or things roll back. You have communities that are being hit really hard and people that are being impacted by it. So you got everyone on the call is obviously engaged in this. They're interested. I'm probably preaching to the choir, but everyone.
I'm supposed to go, John? You can nod. Yeah. All right. I just want to reiterate what a privilege, in particular. It is such a rarity, our political world these days, when you have three people from arguably different parties, but just talking about the issues and not attacking each other. I'm not sure that we could, because I think we have such respect for each other and we're all friends. But that's the point. I mean, that's what government ought to be about. The people that have mutual respect and debate the issues in an informed, intelligent way. And we've lost that. I'm really glad that Erick and Themis are in the leadership positions they are in. I wish there was a third voice there, because I think that would add to the dialogue and to the conversation. But we have a long way to go as a country. I got involved in politics following the shooting in Sandy Hook. And I was hoping that that would spur some action in Washington. And it didn't. And so we've taken that moment and we've made it into a movement. What the LGBTQ plus community has done has provided a model for how movements can get built and effectuate change that I never thought I would see in my lifetime, and I'm so glad that I have. But there's so much more to do. And in my work on gun violence, I met people like Al Sharpton and Eric Garner's sister, and moms and dads who've lost kids in urban environments to gun violence. And their voices are not being heard until now. And I'm hoping that, again, this is not a moment, but it becomes a movement that we will all take part of, because at the end of the day, it's about the future of our kids. And if we can't protect our kids, then what are we? So long way of saying, I really appreciate all of you, and anytime you want, in any form whatsoever, to continue this dialogue among friends and people who look at the issues with an open mind and with an educated view. So thank you, John.
Thank you everyone for coming today. I know the audio was awful. You probably can't hear me right now, but thank you all for coming. And Eric, Monte, Themis, thank you for taking the last hour and 5 minutes or so to come talk with us. And we'll do this again, hopefully in person. So thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Good to see you.